Well, it has been 15 years since my husband, Howard Drossman, and I first officially started the Catamounts. And I say the Catamounts because Catamount it's kind of an old-fashioned name. It means mountain lion. It's very East Coast, Catamount. There's a lot of centers and organizations named after catamounts out there, mountain lions. They must have had them first, and they had to go west or something like that. But and then of course we have the North Catamount Reservoir, and then Howard and I. Well, it wasn't enough to start one catamount, so we started a couple catamounts. That's better. Adaptation, isn't that a natural principle? So I like to think that we started Catamount with some natural intelligence and really trying to keep the metaphors of the natural laws and principles in our minds as we started Catamount. But when I think about where Catamount really started, we all, as we're growing up, have something maybe within us, kind of a fire in the belly that we want to do. And sometimes it's artwork, sometimes it's having a child, and sometimes it's starting an organization. And way back... And so it was that about 20 years ago, when I was a graduate student in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was dating this professor, well, he wasn't a professor then, this grad student, Howard Drossman, and we were in Madison, we had our rollerblades on, and we were rollerblading around Lake Monona. And we said, well, what would we do if we could do anything? If we won the lottery, what would we do? And we looked at each other and we said, oh, we'd start an environmental institute. True love. So kind of moving forward into time, we moved here. I moved here because Howard got a job teaching at Colorado College in the environmental science department. And that was a shock for me. I just gotten married, just moved here. What am I doing in Colorado Springs? And then I tried to find work, but it was very, very difficult. There weren't a lot of nature centers here, environmental education programs. And then I opened my eyes even wider, and I saw that there was Pikes Peak. And there was a big city here. And why not start the Outdoor Education Environmental Center here? Because, to use a science term, it's a niche. So we started to look at property. We thought we would be place-based in the beginning, somewhere really spectacular. And this was about 1993. And somebody told me that the old YMCA ranch up in Woodland Park was for sale. So I went up there with my friend Mitzi in the January, and there was 6 feet of snow. Remember when we had snow? And we cross-country skied because it was the only way we could get around. And I fell so in love with this property. And what it was I think what Celinda was talking about, that Pikes Peak energy and that sacredness of Pikes Peak. And on this property there are prayer trees, and it's a very, very sacred place to the Utes. And maybe most probably that's what I was feeling. So Mitzi and I were just enamored, and the other thing about it was that it's an ecotone, which is a fancy way of saying where two ecosystems overlap. And the property goes from about 9,000 feet to about 10,000 feet. And in an ecotone, the two overlapping ecosystems are montane, and that's the ponderosa pines and the Doug firs and the riparian wetlands and just that beautiful, what we think of when we get up to, Woodland Park area. But then it goes up and up and up, and to the subalpine where the trees start to get smaller and you start to see some of those tundra alpine plants and animals. So because of that ecotone, that sort of Venn diagram of overlapping, just a mega bio-blitz of beauty up there. Well, it actually took 5 years to be able to purchase that property because there was a problem. The problem was that the YMCA land was an 840-acre horseshoe with a section of 640 plus acres of state land sitting inside of it. And the Y and the state got together and they wanted to sell it as one 1,500 plus parcel of land. And we could only afford like the thumbnail. And that was the only part we really wanted, was just that one part that was the Y with a few buildings and the lakes and everything. So it was like, okay, great. Well, we probably can't have it. Well, a friend of ours, Michael Hannigan, said, I heard you were interested in that. It's probably going to be bought by a developer. I have a friend who's an environmental developer. Sounded like an oxymoron to me, but anyways, and why don't you get together with him? So we did, and he plotted it out into 35-acre plots, and we were going to have our environmental center as a little donut hole in there. And we went to put this proposal in front of the Woodland Park County Planning up there in Teller County, and the public had a big outcry, and they said no. And I said, oh, okay, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea anyways. And then it was springtime, but there went that plan. But it was springtime, and a couple weeks later, a friend of mine said, you have to check out the front page of the Cripple Creek Jackpot. There is a front page blow-up picture of Catamount Ranch saying that it's still for sale, and guess who bought it? NASCAR. And there was a picture of a NASCAR track going around a 2-mile circle on the ridge top of Catamount, where they would be training then for the NASCAR race up the peak. April Fools, it said at the bottom. But we still didn't have the opportunity to buy Catamount. So we looked at a bunch of other places, and we still didn't know what to do. But then Michael Hannigan from the Pikes Peak Community Foundation called us again, and he said, I have a much better plan this time. This time, there's this organization called Trust for Public Land, and they are currently working with the county that wants to see all this land protected as open space. And because of your proposal to have an environmental institute up there, they're willing to work with a private buyer. So that's what we did, and it all worked out. But it took 5 years, so it was one of those miraculous manifestations of Pikes Peak, I'm sure. So, oh gosh, 15 years is a lot of history, and so Catamount first started as a very place-based organization up there on Pikes Peak, not far from here, literally 40 minutes Zoom, you're there, down Edlow Road, County Road 28. If you haven't been hiking up there, you gotta go because it's open space. The trailheads are all around and they're all open for the public, and it's just gorgeous. The Catamount vision then, Howard and I said, okay, well, we'll just start the school now. But then we realized, well, we didn't really have the resources to get a big place-based kind of thing going. So we sort of plodded along with some research studies, which really got me thinking about some of the things Carol was saying about CUSP, because early on, about 10, 15 years ago, we hired an amazing researcher, Dr. Peter Marchand. And Peter did do dendrochronology studies, and he worked with Merrill Kaufman, and we were able to look at trees and look at fire cycles dating 2,000 years back and understand the natural fire interval. And does that mean 5 minutes left? Okay, oh my gosh. Okay, So research was going really well, and one of my favorite stories was out of that research, we realized, and CUSP was way ahead of us on this, that the forests do really have to be thinned, but they need to be thinned in a way that is going to provide habitat. And so one of the things we found is that those old mature aspen trees, the ones that you see that look like they're dead, they actually have a fungus living in them that's a keystone species. It softens the aspen so that the cavity woodpeckers can drill in and make cavities, and then they nest and then they leave, and who comes in next but the songbirds and the bats, which control the whole insect population. So these old mature aspen trees really are keystone, and the fungus within them is a keystone species. So it's like little things like that that are so exciting for me as an educator, because it's the research, the work that CUSP is doing and that we're doing. We also have partnerships with CUSP around thinning, where we're a little research laboratory. But it's those kinds of things that are so interesting, is taking that and turning it into education for kids. So we had that kind of going, but what Michael Hannigan said was, and many others, is you need to come down the pass and get known in the community. So that's what we did. We brought Catamount Institute into the community. Our first office we shared with the Nature Conservancy and the Mining Exchange. Then we moved into Beitelman Center when the city cut their funding to continue on the tradition of Beitelman Environmental Center, and so much more. And as Chris mentioned, because I wasn't here, sorry, is we really are the bookends. We work a lot with corporate sustainability and organizational sustainability, but we also work a lot with kindergarten through 12th graders. And again, it's a niche, not always filled, and especially with our Young Environmental Stewards program, our YES program. Imagine living in this city and never leaving your neighborhood. Those are the kind of underserved kids that we work with. We've brought kids to Garden of the Gods in our van, and they think it's the Grand Canyon. We've had kids that have never been up close to a bird before, let alone got to bird band or hold a hawk, or one group of kids actually raised money to every semester we have a different theme for our YES Club. Last semester was forest ecology, and they learned everything about forest ecology, and it was the perfect, forest fire ecology. We even had simulations of whole forests that we would make out of clay with matchsticks being the trees, and we'd have water and wind coming in, and we'd simulate the forest fire, and then we'd look at it afterwards. We'd dump water on it, and we'd see the erosion and everything that would happen, and those kinds of things are pretty visceral for kids. But our kids are probably 80% of them are extremely underserved. We like to think that we really help with nature deficit disorder, which is, it's a real thing. There is a book out there if you haven't read it, Nature Deficit Disorder, Last Child in the Woods. Kids nowadays, there's a rise in ADHD, obesity, diabetes, stress, you name it, and it's because we're not connected to nature. We're plugging in to the electrical outlets instead of just simply going outside. And so that's what we do with kids. We connect them to nature, especially kids that don't normally get that after school. A minute. So Tracy's coming up next, and Tracy has been our lead educator. And she's really the one, when I say that we've probably impacted in this region about 10,000 people, and maybe about 2,000 of them, they're not just kids that we see once or twice. They're kids that we've seen over their development, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, on up, and now we might even have some coming back to intern with us. So that's what we do to create stewardship. Thank you.